Welcome, everyone. So today's explainer, it is absolutely not just some boring list of names and dates that you have to memorize for a test. No way. Think of this as a massive detective investigation into our deep, forgotten past. I want you to picture yourselves as the lead investigators on literally the ultimate cold case, the epic story of human history.
Let's just start with a quick thought experiment. What is the very earliest memory you can actually recollect? Maybe you remember being 5 or 6 years old, finally learning to ride a two-wheeler. Your personal timeline, well, it's relatively short, right? So how do we bridge that gap between our own super brief lives and the massive, epic scale of human history? Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the vastness of time. Second, how we actually measure history. Third, the historian's toolkit. And fourth, the dawn of humanity. Let's jump right in.
Chapter 1. The Vastness of Time.
Before we can track the human story, we really have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of it all. The famous historian E.H. Carr once noted that history is an unending dialogue between the present and the past. It's an active, ongoing conversation. We can only truly make sense of our modern world, like our current politics and our complex societies, by shining a light on the ancient roots they grew out of.
So just how deep do those roots actually go? Well, if you picture a massive, sweeping timeline winding from the explosive, fiery beginnings of the Earth billions of years ago, all the way through the ages of single-celled organisms and, of course, the dinosaurs, we eventually get to us. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have only been walking the planet for about 300,000 years. Guys, on the cosmic clock, we literally just showed up in the last fraction of a second. Yet our footprint? Immensely impactful.
Chapter 2. How we measure history.
To map out all these major historical shifts, historians use a very specific calendar system. You'll frequently see the terms BCE, which stands for Before Common Era, and CE, meaning Common Era. Honestly, just think of this like a simple number line from your math class. CE is exactly like positive numbers. The years just count forward into the future. That's the era we're living in right now. BCE, on the flip side, works just like negative numbers. The larger the BCE number is, the further back in time you're going. It counts backward.
So calculating the sheer amount of time between a BCE date and our modern CE date requires a really simple formula. You just take the BCE year and you add the CE year to it. But here's the catch. And trust me, it's a trap a lot of students fall into. You absolutely must remember to subtract 1. Why? Well, because in the Gregorian calendar that most of the world uses today, there is no year 0. The timeline jumps straight from 1 BCE right over to 1 CE. Kind of weird, right? But that's exactly how it works.
Okay, let's actually apply this math to a real historical event. Let's take the birth of Gautama Buddha, which was approximately 560 BCE. If we assume our present year is 2024 CE, we take 560, we add 2024, and then we subtract 1. Boom. That gives us 2,583 years ago. When you hear a number like that, it really puts the massive expanse of human civilization into perspective, doesn't it?
Chapter 3. The Historian's Toolkit.
Now I want you to meet our specialized detectives of the past. First up, we've got geologists, who study the physical features of the Earth, like the soil and the rocks. Then we have paleontologists, who are out there analyzing ancient fossils of plants and animals. Anthropologists, they study the cultures and the deep development of human societies. And of course, the archaeologists, who do the really meticulous physical work of digging up the remains left behind. The tools, the pots, the ruined buildings. Together, these folks form a completely elite historical task force.
The thing is, history is basically a giant, highly complex jigsaw puzzle. And the tough reality is that a lot of those pieces are just permanently missing. So to actually see the big picture, we have to piece together totally different types of sources. We use archaeological sources like excavated structures, oral sources like folklore passed down through generations, literary sources like ancient texts and old travel diaries, and artistic sources like ancient paintings and sculptures.
Now, when our historical detectives gather these puzzle pieces, say old coins, big stone pillars, or intricate sculptures, they definitely don't just accept them blindly. Historians take immense care to cross-check these artifacts. Does a newly discovered sculpture confirm what an ancient poem says, or does it tell a totally contradictory story? When the puzzle pieces match perfectly, the history becomes crystal clear. But when they contradict, that is when the real detective work begins to figure out what actually happened.
Chapter 4. The Dawn of Humanity.
Okay, let's set the scene.
I want you to imagine a landscape roughly 300,000 years ago. Modern humans were surviving entirely as hunter-gatherers. Picture these really small, tightly knit bands of people, and they relied entirely on what they could hunt or forage from wild plants. They lived in super temporary camps or rock shelters. Obviously, they had no grocery stores, no permanent houses, nothing like that. Literally every single day was an active, high-stakes battle against nature just to survive.
And let me tell you, nature was deeply unforgiving back then. For an immense span of time, we're talking from over 100,000 years ago right down to about 12,000 years ago, the Earth was completely locked in the last ice age. A vast portion of the planet was just totally frozen over. Enduring this freezing, harsh era was an absolute masterclass in human persistence. Our ancestors mastered fire and created much better stone tools just to keep their tiny communities alive against totally overwhelming odds.
But eventually, thankfully, the climate began to warm up. The ice melted, the river swelled, and honestly, everything changed. We transitioned from nomadic bands constantly hunting for food to settled, permanent farming communities. Now, this wasn't just a simple change in diet. No, it was a monumental revolution with massive, long-term consequences for how human society would eventually be governed.
We call this the agricultural leap. By finally settling down near fertile rivers, early humans started growing cereals and domesticating animals, which provided a totally reliable food supply for the first time. Consequently, those tiny little hamlets grew into much larger, highly complex villages. And with this came a profound political and social shift. Suddenly, we see the emergence of community leaders or chieftains. Their role wasn't just to rule over people, but to organize the welfare of the entire community. They shared lands, they developed cool new technologies like pottery, and eventually even began using metals. This incredibly long-term transition from scattered, desperate survivors to highly structured societies, it laid the ultimate groundwork for the entire political world we live in today.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Life during those early transitions was incredibly fragile. Other ancient human species actually went extinct. Our ancestors could have easily disappeared right along with them. So, I want you to consider this. How much of your existence today, your life, your community, your cozy modern comforts, do you owe entirely to their incredible courage and persistence? Keep that massive idea in mind as you continue exploring the grand tapestry of the past. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking those big questions.